My name's Ursula, and this is the channel where I interview people who have achieved financial independence. If you enjoy listening, then please do subscribe. So today I'm speaking to Gary from Free Your Finance. Hello, Gary. And it's a slightly different episode today because Gary's not achieved financial independence, but he is very much on the journey to achieving financial independence. So I hope you find this episode useful and helpful. So hello, Gary.
Thank you very much for having me on.
No, not at all. So first of all, just kind of tell me a bit about yourself. Just tell me a bit about your background and what you're currently up to.
Sure. So as you've already said, my name's Gary. I've recently started a channel called Free Your Finance. And as you said, I'm on my journey towards reaching FI. So I'm documenting what I'm doing and why. Not before, but what I do as a job, I'm actually a professional photographer. So I've been doing photography since I left school. I've always had a business-based background since when I can remember I was making money somehow. I'm one of these typical Del boys that was sort of selling sweets, selling pizzas, selling drinks, I would do anything to make money. I don't know what instilled that into me. I think it was probably my dad pushed that into me very much so. So by the time I was sort of 17, 18 years old, I'd managed to sort of save up a lot of money and purchase my first ever buy-to-let property. Maybe we'll speak about them a bit later on in this video. But so now as I said, I'm a professional photographer. I do run a second business. I offer photo booths, like the party booths that have at weddings and commercial events and stuff, which has been a very successful business too. And it's led me down this path towards being FI probably around 4 years time now. So I'm getting pretty close. I'm almost there.
Oh, wow. So if you don't mind me asking, what age will you be when you kind of aim to achieve FI?
Sure. So originally I put my aim out as 40, it then come down to 35, and now I'm looking at about 34. So I'm 30 years old right now. I know I've got a baby face, so I don't look it, but I'm 30 years old. And by 34, 35, I should be there.
Wow, that's very impressive, and certainly at a very, very young age. So you kind of talked about having an interest in kind of business and being a bit of a Del boy and, always wanting to kind of make a little bit of money. But when did you kind of first become, I suppose, A, interested in financial independence as a concept, but B, aware of the kind of financial independence, retire or early or FIRE movement as it's known? When did that when did you kind of become aware that there even was a movement?
Believe it or not, less than a year ago. So I actually come across it in September last year. So I didn't realise, but I'd been pursuing FIRE without realising it. So my dream was always to retire early. My dream was always that there must be something more than just working till you're 68 years old, reaching your pension age and sort of kicking the bucket a few years later. Unfortunately, I lost my dad in September, and he worked all his life very hard. He'd saved up a lot of money, and I don't know the exact years, but I feel like he probably only had about 4 or 5 years of enjoying retirement before unfortunately passing and leaving quite a substantial amount to my mum. And it made me really think, like, there must be more to life than this. I'd already been pursuing it for a long time. By then I had multiple buy-to-let properties. I had 2 successful businesses. So it allowed me to save quite heavily. Luckily, I've never got a spending bug. I don't know why, but I've always been very sensible. So I'd always save money ever since probably childhood, getting my pocket money. Well, I do know partly why. It was very much instilled into me by my family. You don't sort of waste money, you save. I'd been pursuing it without realising, but I only actually knew what this movement was only a year ago.
That's really interesting that you say that, because there's other people who I've spoken to. In fact, I think the first person I ever recorded an interview with, a guy called Zach, who achieved FI at the age of, I think, 43. And a few of the people I've spoken to have achieved FI at 43. So I don't know what it is about that age. but he said exactly the same. He said that he wasn't even aware that it was a movement or that it was a thing. He just knew that he wanted to do things differently.
Mhm.
And I think it's also really interesting what you say about your father sadly passing away. Is I think sometimes, especially kind of, you know, when we kind of go through quite traumatic events, it can kind of really force you to reflect on what's important. And it's interesting the stuff that you say about your family. I can kind of relate to, because my parents have always been, I wouldn't say they're not mean, but they've been frugal. And I remember when I was younger, you know, you'd kind of see other people with kind of nicer things, and I'd always think, oh, why don't we have those things? But it's kind of only now, as I've grown older, that I've kind of realized that, you know, they actually invested their money in like properties and businesses and things like that. And my dad, as well, thankfully, just retired, and my mum retired a few years ago. And you know, I keep on having to say to them, enjoy your retirement money, because you're right. It seems it's, you know, it's really important if people kind of work really, really hard. It kind of seems important that they can kind of enjoy their money and kind of enjoy their time. And yeah, like you say, I think time is one of the few things that we can't get back. You know, you can always make more money or, you know, buy more food or whatever, but you can't get that time back. So I think that will probably resonate with quite a lot of people. But what do you think is kind of important in terms of achieving financial independence, in terms of mindset and attitude?
So I was very lucky that I had this saving bug instilled into me, and I didn't have a spending bug either. So they were two huge things that I'd already achieved. So I never had to chase that or change a mindset about not spending. My partner, however, she's completely different. She's been brought up of very much of this whole sort of YOLO, you know, and like spend your money, you work hard enough, enjoy it. And so we've come from two very different sort of sides of things. And it's quite interesting being in a relationship and having those two different sort of paths towards retirement and just to life in general. So the mindsets, I'd say I haven't really changed anything. There's something that were drilled into me from a young age. And since answering your first question, I've been thinking a bit more, and I can remember sort of different things of my dad encouraging savings. I think my dad was very clever in challenging me, you know. I think he never did it in a way that made me feel like I had to do it, but he was very clever in like, oh, I wonder if you could do this. And he really got me like motivated by my business. He got me motivated. I'm motivated with working and saving. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say I've changed much mindset. Luckily, I had these sort of things instilled in me. The main thing that the FIRE movement has taught me, which I didn't realize before, it's given me a number of knowing when I reach FI. You know, before it was quite an open question. Well, I've got these properties, I've got this income. Like when will I be able to sort of pursue the dream of living financially free? But by finding this movement, it's given me an actual calculation. I know it's only a sort of rule of thumb, but it's given me a rough calculation of knowing when I reach it. Now I know what I'm working towards.
Yeah, and I suppose also it's maybe kind of meeting like-minded individuals, either people who've already achieved financial independence or kind of people who are sort of on the journey, so to speak. But I just wanted to kind of touch on something that you said earlier about your partner, because I think this is another thing that people will relate to a lot, and something that I found, and I know I discussed this with Barney when aka the escape artist, when I interviewed him, is sometimes I do find with FIRE, with the community, the emphasis can very much be on people as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important to be aware of the fact that often, you know, people are individuals, but they've also got family and friends and partners and wider commitment. And it can be quite challenging sometimes to sort of marry perhaps your financial aims with another person who, like you say, might come from quite a different financial background, might have a completely different money blueprint. Sort of making that work can be quite it can be quite challenging. So how do you sort of balance kind of saving, investing, working hard with also spending money and treating yourself, and also I suppose compromising within your relationship as well, because it's always got to be a bit of compromise. How do you sort of manage that?
That's been the biggest thing. It's been one big compromise. It's been finding a balance between the two of us. There's been bickers and arguments, of course there has. We have very different views on how we want to approach things, and obviously just as much as Katie's had to come towards me, I've had to go towards her too. We've had to find a happy medium, which has been quite difficult at times. I won't lie to you. I'm not pretending like we had sort of one discussion and it was all sorted. The latest thing we're going through right now is purchasing a house together, and our sort of views and aims and goals of what we wanted from a house were so different, and we had to find a happy medium. And I'm really lucky that she does work with me a lot. I probably am hard work to be with. I'm probably not every girl's dream. This guy that wants to save money and sort of retire early. But there was one sort of, in my eyes, there was one real light bulb moment, and I don't wish to sound arrogant or anything like that, where I feel like the light clicked for her, and we sat down and we watched the Playing with Fire documentary. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, by Scott Adkins.
Yeah.
And, she sat there and watched it with me, and I think before that she was very much like, "Oh, what you making me watch this rubbish for?" And we sat down and watched it, and it felt to me, it sounds so stupid, but it just felt like a spark had lit under, and really got her realizing that, wow, I make these quite small decisions now, and they're going to change my life and make me lead this life that I would like to. So yeah, it's been all about finding a balance between the two of us. I've probably pushed her too hard sometimes, and she certainly told me that I'm pushing too hard. She's made that very clear. But it's been a huge thing about finding a balance. But I think so much of being in a relationship is finding a compromise, not only finances. I think everything in a relationship is finding a balance.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also sometimes a bit of difference can be a really good thing, because it challenges you both. I think I'm probably quite similar. I'm probably quite financially minded in a way that probably most ordinary people aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think in every relationship you always kind of have those discussions, and it's one of those reasons why money can be something that can cause a lot of problems, understandably, within relationships, within friendships, within family. But it's just about having those discussions and kind of coming to a compromise, and knowing that it's tricky, because sometimes it may seem like you do have to make a lot of compromises, and it can be really difficult. But then I've got it can also be really hard for single people as well. I've got a few friends of mine who are trying to get on the property market in London, and doing it on a single person salary is just so much harder than doing it on a sort of a two people's salary, or business earnings. And so it's kind of it's a little bit of swings and roundabouts, I suppose, in terms of kind of how you make that work. But do you kind of, in terms of your budgeting, do you kind of allocate a certain amount of money to kind of fund stuff? Do you have, like, people talk about like the 50, 30, 20 rule? Do you have anything like that, or are you kind of a bit more relaxed?
I am definitely a bit more relaxed. So I don't actually have a specific budget. I allocate money to go out to my investments at the start of each month. So they go out automatically. So then I suppose I'm almost in the mindset of whatever's left is mine, and if I choose to spend that, I choose to spend that. So luckily I've never had this spending bug, like I said. So I have to admit, often I am left over with money, but yeah, the most important thing I've done is I've set up my investments to go out at the start of the month. When I get paid from my company, the next day the money is moved on to an investment. So by moving that money straight out, that solves that problem for me. Then what I'm left with is mine to do whatever I want with. And I can assure you, I don't want people thinking I sort of live like in a cardboard box, and don't do anything. My friends comment, I live on holiday, I'm forever on holiday. I love trips, but maybe the sort of trips I enjoy are not everyone's cup of tea. I'm not sitting in the Maldives for 3 weeks. Maybe I'm backpacking in Asia or something. And you can do these things so affordably now. It's quite incredible. But that's where I get my enjoyment from life. I've never got my enjoyment from expensive cars or sort of flash clothes or anything like that, you know. And so yeah, it's that's been the biggest thing that has helped me is investing. I forget what they call it. They say pay yourself first, don't they?
Yeah.
So that's probably
Yeah.
been the most important thing I've done for my journey.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the same. I don't really have anything as rigid as, you know, dividing it by 50, 30, 20, whatever, but I just have a certain amount that kind of goes out straight into the Vanguard account.
Mm-hmm.
And then to a certain extent, whatever else I do is sort of up to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really have to, yeah, like you say, it is paying yourself first. And it's like that money's gone. So you don't have the option of touching it or trying to do anything with it. It's, you know, it is what it is. So I think that's definitely a really good way of going about it. And I've discussed consumerism once again with other guests, and I'm fairly similar in that I'm not that bothered about material things. So I mean, even before lockdown, I can't remember the last time I went clothes shopping. In fact, I do need to go clothes shopping. I am incredibly low on clothes, although I must admit the queues do put me off somewhat. But I've never been bothered about having like the latest phone or the latest gadget or, you know, the newest laptop. I'm just not that bothered about that. But what I really value is experiences, holidays, weekends away, you know, with friends and family, trips abroad, traveling. So I'm quite similar in that that's kind of where my money goes. And you know, it's a balance and a compromise. So I'll spend that money there, but I don't, like I said, I don't spend it on just stuff that doesn't really add much value to my life. So yeah, I think I can sort of definitely relate to that.
Sorry to jump in on top of you, but you made me think of something about that. It's like recently, as I said, Katie and I are purchasing a house at the moment, and I have an apartment elsewhere, and I'm just clearing my stuff out. And even with someone that doesn't spend much, I think of the money I've spent on these different things that I'm now putting on Facebook Marketplace for probably an eighth of what they cost me. It's quite scary, you know.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and I mean, I often find things are not as easy to sell as you think of. You think they are. You know, I try and think of a few things that I've tried to sell. You know, maybe nice, you know, even like the odd kind of nice dress that I had to get for like a formal occasion, and I think I just ended up giving stuff to charity in the end, because it's in my experience anyway, you just don't really get that much for it. It's like once you've kind of had it, you know, for even not maybe a very long period of time, it's quite scary how quickly it just goes down in value.
Definitely.
And it's you know, that's not to say you can't live like a monk. Like, you know, you're always going to make some bad financial decisions. I suppose it's just a case of kind of like limiting them as much as possible.
Yeah.
So you've talked a lot about your photography and also your kind of buy to let. I'm kind of keen to learn a bit more, because obviously you are fairly young. I'm keen to learn how you sort of got so many kind of buy to let properties. And yeah, how you kind of went about that. That would be really interesting to know.
Sure. So I like I said, I've been working since I was young. So started off sort of a bit crooked, I suppose, you know, selling in the playground and selling. I used to support a football team. I remember I used to go home and away to watch this football team, and I used to sell stuff on the coach to the other supporters. So my mum I've told this story before, so you may have heard it, but my mum used to cook me a massive pizza and cut it in slices. And she must have thought I was a greedy little pig, but I sold all those slices so I could go and watch the football and come home with more money than I went with. So I always had that passion of making money. I really enjoyed it. And then through my sort of teenage years, I got many jobs. I worked as a football referee. I worked in a chip shop. I worked at the local football club's ground. So I did so many things and I never spent the money. I just saved and saved and saved. And by the time I reached 18 years old, I'd, believe it or not, saved enough money to purchase the property. So I had this money sitting in my ISA, and I got the interest one year. And I remember it quite vividly. I got the interest, and I remember going down to my dad's in his study, sitting there, and I sort of said, like, this is almost criminal, the amount of money I've got in there, and I'm getting this much. Like, surely there's something better I can do with my money. And he said, yeah, you could buy a property. I was like, I can't buy a property. I'm 18 years old, you know. And he was like, well, why can't you? Of course you can. So anyway, we started looking, and I did. I went out and I bought a property. I bought the first property I ever bought. I bought for cash, so I didn't have a mortgage on it. Because to be honest with you, I did look at actually buying a second one. Because it was a new block that had been recently refurbished, and I thought the properties were very reasonably priced. And they wouldn't even lend me a mortgage, you know, because of my age, and at the time I was self-employed as well. So basically, buying it cash, what that allowed me to do is sort of leverage, you know, which helped me a lot as to sort of borrow money out of the property. So basically, after I'd owned that property for 6 months, I was then allowed to raise a mortgage on it. So I then borrowed money out of the property and purchased another one. And then that process kept happening quite aggressively. So quite quickly I got 5. And then I started realizing that a lot of my money is going into property, and I've sort of the age old, like, you've got all your eggs in one basket, which is when I started looking more into things like index funds and stuff like that. So the buy-to-lets have been a great investment. They've been hard work. They come with a lot of challenges, and maybe we'll cover those. But they've definitely sort of really given me a massive boost towards my journey towards FI. And my dad, I do it very differently to most. So all of my buy-to-lets are on repayment mortgages. So probably 99% of landlords have interest-only mortgages to increase cash flow.
Yeah.
But instead, I was quite old school. My dad sort of taught me, oh, you have mortgage-free properties and it's pure profit for the rest of your life, it's security, etc., etc. I think he was brought up in the days of sort of 10% mortgage interest rates, you know, and that led him a lot. So there's a lot I've done wrong. Well, I say wrong, I'm in a fairly good position, so maybe some would say it's not wrong, but there's a lot I've done that wouldn't be the norm. But I am glad I have in some respects, because now I'm reaping those benefits, and obviously in a few years some of my properties are going to be mortgage free, or certainly have a very small balance left on, especially with inflation taking the property prices up too.
So are these kind of all properties all kind of near to where you live?
Yes, so all the properties are in the surrounding towns of where I live in Essex. They're all within about 50 minutes of London. So one of the sort of things I look for when I purchase properties is I like things that are near a train station. I like parking, and I have to admit I usually buy things that are ready to go. So that's another probably mistake that some landlords would say I've done. Most would buy at value and put their sort of own money.
Do it up a bit, yeah.
But to be honest with you, 18, 19, 20 years old, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't have contacts. And there was something to be said about buying these refurbished properties at a fairly good price and having a tenant in there almost the next day, you know. So that's what fitted me and what I wanted. Obviously, everyone's different and want to do a different journey. But yeah, they're sort of the things I look for when I was purchasing properties. There is so much I do differently now, I must say. So I don't want anyone sort of commenting in your YouTube channel sort of saying, oh, why did he do that? Why did he do it? I was 18 years old, you know. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just gave it my best shot.
To be honest, I think it sounds like you had a far better idea of what of what you were doing than most 18-year-olds, including myself. I think I was, I think I was traveling around the world at that point, so I was probably more interested in I was probably more interested in spending money than making it. Unfortunately, that was my downfall. And like you say, you know, it's everyone has their own kind of, I was going to say, not risk threshold, but everyone has to feel comfortable with what they're doing. And I think especially at 18, you know, it's a fairly young age, you know, to take a property on that you're going to sort of completely have to refurb, get the right contacts in, you know, no builders, because I'll be honest, that's something that puts me, I would love to do a homes under the hammer, buy a place and do it up. But what really puts me off is I don't currently have any technical skills. I am more academic. And B is I just don't know, you know, any local kind of builders. And the impression I get is that contacts are just so important in terms of getting very good tradespeople in and getting it at a decent price. So yeah, I can completely understand. And also I did something fairly similar, although I'll admit it wasn't with my own money. But when my grandma passed away, my dad very kindly gave me and my two sisters a decent share of her money, and we actually bought a new build near where I'm from, not where I live now, but near where I'm from. And we had that for about 5 years, and we sold it back in last October, actually. And yeah, like you say, it was a completely new build. We didn't have to sort of really do anything with it, and that did kind of suit us because none of us we've all kind of moved. I'm from Leicester originally, and we've all moved away. Me and my sisters have, so it would have been a bit kind of tricky. But yeah, now maybe thinking back on it, you think, oh, maybe we could have done something a bit more adventurous. But it's really easy to say that in hindsight, isn't it?
Of course, definitely.
But yeah, so it is sort of one of those things. And it's interesting also you say about kind of interest only and repayment, because yeah, my understanding is that most people do tend to do kind of interest only mortgages so that they can kind of up their cash flow. But then I've spoken to someone else, in fact, someone else who I interviewed who'd achieved financial independence. He bought a second property and he actually did it via a repayment mortgage. And I think that's because he just really wanted to kind of pay the mortgage off. This was his only sort of other property aside from his main home. And he just didn't want to be in debt.
Yeah.
So I suppose also it's kind of about what is your kind of tolerance to debt. And so yeah, everyone's kind of, it's difficult. It's different for everyone. But it's interesting you kind of talked about challenges, because I'd have thought, so just for listeners and viewers, we're kind of recording around the summer of 2020. So it's kind of, we're sort of still in lockdown, but sort of not in lockdown. I think we're mostly out of lockdown. But how have you what kind of challenges have you found recently, but also I suppose in the past in terms of buy to let? And I suppose on top of that, a lot of people say that, the best days of kind of being a buy to let investor are over. And, what would you say to that as well?
How long have you got? There's been many challenges. I've been investing for 12 years and in the 12 years I've been investing, I've had a lot of challenges. So just to name a few, I won't bore you with all of them. One you've mentioned is regards to the rules and regulations change so regularly. So recently there's been things introduced such as Section 24. There's been, they're bringing in a new licensing at the moment. In some cities now you have to apply for a license to be a landlord. There's always new things coming out that always ultimately cost us more. And there's only so many times you can pass these costs on to the tenant. Obviously, every property is going to have a ceiling of how much it can demand. Then the other challenges, obviously, you have challenges with tenants. Luckily, I have a lot of fantastic tenants, which I will speak about in a moment why I believe I do. But I have had some tough tenants too. I've had challenging with managing agents. So when I first purchased properties, they were all managed for me. And I went through 4 different managing agents, all of which didn't do a fantastic job, to be honest with you. And I was having sort of problems with tenants. I was having lost keys. I was having failed inspections, and you're paying quite a lot of money for these companies to manage these properties for you, and they're not doing their job. And when I felt like I was chasing them up almost weekly to do their job, it got to the point where I was like, well, why am I paying them to manage them? Why don't I do it myself? Which comes on to why I believe now I have better tenants. I think a big part of that is because I am a private landlord, and now my tenants deal with me directly, and we build a relationship, and I think tenants respect that. Sometimes they can feel like they're dealing with a human being rather than sort of ringing an answering machine and getting back, like hearing back from someone 3 weeks later. But then further to that, I've had problems with issues even from purchasing a property. This is an example where I believe this property had parking. Like I said earlier, it's one of my big must-haves is parking. And it turned out it didn't, basically. I'd been sold it on the premise that it had a parking space. My solicitor had raised the inquiry saying, please, can you confirm what parking space belongs to my client? And yeah, about a year after owning this property, I got a message from my tenant saying, oh, someone's just parked in my spot, saying that it's their spot. And I looked into it, and it turns out I didn't have parking at all. And I basically, long story short, I started chasing my solicitor, sort of saying, well, what's going on? Like, this should have had parking. And they argued that they never knew it come with a parking space. Yet I've got their inquiries saying which parking space belongs to our client, you know. So you're right. Some of the contractors you can use solicitors and tradesmen. You've got to be so careful, because if they've got a way out of doing something correctly, they'll take it sometimes. Unfortunately, not every business person is as honest as you and I.
Yeah. But what do you think in general about the future of buy-to-let? Although I suppose I was going to say that the stamp duty surcharge, although obviously there have been some recent stamp duty changes, but I mean, like I say, some people sort of talk about it as, oh, it's not the best, it's not what it was. I mean, would you still do you still think it can be a viable route for people to go down if they're so inclined?
I think it is definitely still viable, but I think there's a lot of things that need to be done differently. I think firstly, if you're only looking at getting sort of a handful of properties, I don't want to say it's pointless, but it's almost not worth owning them personally anymore. I think they need to be put into a company and dealt with as a limited company, because there's benefits then of the Section 24 and things like that. The thing that scares me with property now is how the regulations are so just ever changing, you know, and when I think how much things have changed just in the 12 years I've been doing it, it scares me to think how much they're going to change in the next 20, 30, 40 years, you know. Not so long ago, the Labour, John McDonnell, he was saying about introducing a cap on rents and things like that, and those sort of things could affect me big time, you know, and that's why I've started looking at sort of spreading my wings and having my sort of fingers in more pies, so to speak. So I do think that it's still viable, but I think location wise, you need to move out of London now. If you're looking at buy-to-lets, I would be going straight up north. I'd be looking at places like Liverpool, Newcastle, Huddersfield, all these sort of places where you can buy properties at sort of 50, 60k that still rent out at £500 per calendar month. I think personally, for my risk ratio, that would be the only way I'd really be looking at it now.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know I've spoken to quite a few people who've said it, in terms of yield, you really just have to go to the north of England, because you're not gonna. It's very expensive, and you're not even necessarily going to get the yield, especially in somewhere like London, where people are still paying crazy prices, and yes, the rents are high, but they're not really, or I can't see anyway, how they're high enough to kind of justify the initial investment.
I agree.
But one just other question that I want to ask about buy-to-let, and this is a personal question, is how do you actually decide and go through that decision? Because so I'm someone, I'm quite analytical, and I suppose I suffer a little bit from what people might call analysis paralysis. So I'm someone that I tend to overanalyze something, and then I kind of won't commit because I think, oh, I don't know enough. How do you, when did you kind of think, right, I know enough, I've done enough research, and I'm going to make that decision and put an offer in and buy it if I can?
So I would say when I purchased my first one, I probably didn't have enough experience, but luckily, I don't know why, but I've always had a gut feeling for things. I want to be so careful not to sound arrogant, because I promise you I don't mean it this way, but often what I think is often like it works out for me, whether or not that's luck or whether or not that's, I don't know if intuition is the right word. So I think it was a gut feeling. It sounds really silly. I did look at some basic calculations. So obviously I worked out the rental yields. I looked at the ongoing costs and what I'm going to get back from it. And part of it, I suppose I was encouraged by my dad. He was brought up very much of your money safe in bricks and mortar, But yeah, I think the advantage I've got is the properties I buy are in the location that I live in. So I know the areas well. I know the sort of people that are going to be living in these areas, and I can understand if they're a good location, a bad location, a good buyer. Obviously, by watching the markets as much as I do, you almost become a property expert in regards to that area, So my partner and I were recently looking for a very specific area, almost a few streets. So we knew almost how much those properties were worth before. and you get an estate agent now, like we recently had an agent in to value my mum's house, and all they do is look on Rightmove and look at comparables, you know. So Katie and I almost become more of an expert on that area than the estate agents were. So there's a lot you can do to sort of get yourself ready. Like I have alerts set up for the areas I look in, so I'm getting emails every day with properties. So it's almost become second nature to sort of say, oh, that's a good deal, or that's a bad deal. And at the moment, they're all bad deals. They're very expensive and not worth investing in.
So yeah, it's just almost that quite gradual, almost more long-term process of, in your case, knowing an area and just kind of getting those alerts in and just monitoring and like you say, you know, even just checking out the land registry, because I think a lot of times people don't realize that actually this information is readily available, you know, what purchase price and sale price, you know, it can be found out quite easily.
Further, I didn't answer part of your question, but with regards to if I would buy again, I think that was an earlier question. I think I would wait for a crash in the market. I believe we're on course towards some problems. You know, I know there's no guarantee for this, but I can't see how, with everything going on right now in the economy, that we're not on course for some problems. I don't believe that with everything that's gone on recently, we're only going to have that tiny little correction back in March, and ultimately that's going to lead to the house prices reducing. So I think I'd definitely be looking more actively if prices dropped quite significantly.
Yeah, it's the ever kind of perennial question, isn't it? I think especially in London and the surrounding areas, it's, you know, is there going to be a crash, or, you know, is it just going to be a slight correction? And it's really difficult. But I think, if you're purely an investor, I can see why you'd want to be pretty cautious. So yeah, that's definitely a really good point to make. So kind of final question, what other projects are you currently working on? Because I know you've kind of recently set up your YouTube channel. So yeah, tell us a bit about that and any other kind of stuff that you've got going on.
Sure. So with regards to work-based projects, absolutely naffle right now. Obviously with furlough going on, I actually shot my first wedding in 4 months on Saturday. Now bear in mind I was supposed to have about 65 weddings this year, so it's been a tough year. I won't go into too much depth, but it has made me realise how lucky I am that I'm pursuing this goal, and I have these things in place already. You know, if I didn't and I was living paycheck to paycheck like many people are, I would have been royally screwed this year, you know. So yeah, work-wise, nothing. So that was one of the main reasons I started my channel, actually, because I had the spare time. I've wanted to start a YouTube channel for years. I've really always loved the idea of starting a channel. I think I really enjoy making my content, but I've never really known what to make content on. I know the obvious suggestion would be photography, but I didn't fancy making a channel on photography, to be honest with you. I think when you work in something all day long, you want to move away from it when you're at home, you know, you want to have a break from it. And I realised how much I rant to people about personal finance and how much I actually enjoy talking about finance. So I think it kind of sort of become the natural step to make a channel talking about personal finance and just sort of sharing my journey. And like you said earlier, like I'm meeting people through the network of doing this, and it's like a support network almost, you know, and we all help each other, and I'm really enjoying making the content. And yeah, as I said, it's called Free Your Finance. I'm sort of documenting my journey, and I do also do some interviews too, and I enjoy sort of talking to other people as well about what they're doing. And you've also mentioned this in the call, but everyone's got such different paths towards the same end goal, which I find quite incredible too.
Yeah, no, I've watched some of your episodes, and yeah, I saw that you managed to get Mama Furfur onto your channel, which is pretty impressive, because I think I've been following her for 18 months, and yeah, she's really quite a kind of a key figure in FI circles.
Definitely.
And that was a really interesting interview, actually.
Yeah, I messaged like I said, I started this sort of interview style series, and I messaged her on Instagram, believe it or not. and I sort of put out a cheeky request. I introduced myself and I just said, look, I'm trying to get people involved. Like, and I understand you've probably got much bigger fish to fry, you know, but I would really love to have you on the channel. And within a few minutes, she came back to me and she was like, yeah, sure. When are you free? And I felt like I'd won the lottery, you know. I remember sort of like almost running around the house, you know, like what, like it was amazing. Because as you said, she has become a very sort of inspirational person in this movement, and obviously she talks about a lot more than just the FIRE movement, you know. Hers is a lot more also about budgeting and finance, and she's someone I've watched for years, and I've admired her channel, along with a few other sort of English based influencers. But we've spoken about it before privately, but there aren't so many UK based influencers, and that was a big reason why I decided to start my channel, because I wanted to give a bit of a UK based opinion. Everything I found was VTSAX and 401k.
401ks, yeah. I'm like, I don't even know what a 401k is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to sort of introduce a UK based opinion, and I know there's other people doing it, but I don't think you can ever have too many people encouraging people to save money and think about their life choices, you know. I think the more people spreading that word, the better, basically.
Yeah, I was very similar reasons to why I set up my channel. I'd kind of been meaning to do it for a while, and then I'd conducted my first interview back in January, and then sort of lockdown happened. And even though, as I say, I was actually really busy with work, because I'm actually a civil servant, so you know, I was very busy, and I was working the entire time in quite long hours. But yeah, I thought that there was a bit of a dearth of UK content, which is not to say that the US content isn't useful, but in some cases it just isn't relevant. Like sort of when they're going into the technical detail of, like you say, 401ks or particular investment vehicles or health programs. You know, obviously Americans have to think about health insurance.
Yeah.
You know, for the most part, that's not something that people have to think about. Obviously you can buy health insurance if that's what you want, but it's not kind of a must have the way it is in the States. And it's you know, so there's quite a lot of information there that sometimes isn't as relevant or pertinent. And I noticed people like Mama Furfur, and then obviously the Barney the Escape Artist, and Ken the Humble Penny, and I think obviously there's a few others, but there seems to kind of be a bit of a growing kind of burgeoning network of UK based kind of bloggers and YouTubers and podcasters, and a bit of a community really. Because I think what I say to a lot of people, because I'm interested in money, but I'm not a particularly technical person, so I'm not very good with, you know, I'm not someone who's really into spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. I probably should be, but there you go. But I think for me it's more about freedom.
Yeah.
And it's through kind of doing the 9 to 5, and I think kind of long term I would quite like to work myself, but at the moment I'm sort of doing a 9 to 5 job. It kind of does make you realize that you give over a lot of your time to someone else. And it just always shocked me that people didn't really question that. Yeah. They don't really question that, you know, you'll do a certain amount of work, and increasingly for longer. You know, it's not, people aren't retiring at, you know, 55, 60. It's kind of 65, 70. And yeah, I just kind of thought, God, there's got to be a better way, or at least a different way of doing things, really. And I think when you articulate it in those terms, I think it becomes a lot more exciting to most people, rather than, you know, this is obviously just my take on it.
Yeah.
Rather than just talking about kind of dry numbers, although obviously the numbers do really matter. And a lot of people do find numbers really engaging. But I think when you talk about it in terms of taking back control of your life and taking back control of your time, I think that's when kind of people start to get a bit more interested in it, in my experience anyway.
Well, multiple comments to what you just said. But firstly, if you're pursuing FI, even if you never reach an end goal, you're still that much better off whatever you have done, you know. So that's the first. When people sort of say, oh, well, I can't reach it, I'm never going to be able to say, well, even if you're saving £50 a month, it's still going to be so much better than doing nothing, you know. So yeah, I think that is part of what you just said. Another thing you did just say, it sort of led on to the fact that in the UK, I feel like we've almost been sort of taught this like attitude of spending. You earn to spend, you know, you want the biggest house. You go for a mortgage and you're almost encouraged to borrow more than you can afford to borrow, you know. Yeah. And I was on a call recently. I hope she's not watching it because I'm not entirely, but I believe she was German, and she was saying like, I'm sure it was Germany. In Germany, they go for a small house, you know, and she was buying a new build, and the builders were sort of saying, oh, we're going to make this bathroom this big. You want a big bathroom? And she was like, well, why do I need a toilet and a bath, you know? But for some reason in the UK, we've got this sort of tendency to buy to the biggest we can, buy the most expensive we can. And I think it's just changing your mindset, like we were speaking about earlier, to realizing you don't need that to have a fulfilled life. I drive around in a 2011 car, you know, and it's not a particularly nice car, and many times my friends have said to me, why have you still got that old car, you know? But it's just, it doesn't add value. If I was driving around in a 50 grand Merc, it wouldn't add value to my life. And I think that's what is important. It's just finding what gives sort of value to your life. And for me, the value I'm going to get is when I can travel the world, when I can not be tied down working sort of, like I said, at the moment, I'm shooting sort of 60, 70 weddings a year, which is hard work, you know, with the edit too. And I'm not saying that I don't want to be working anymore. When I reach F5, I'm quite different to most people, but maybe I can do 15 weddings a year, you know, and it will give me that freedom to be able to do so.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, it's not, you don't have to not work, but it's more about the kind of the freedom to kind of work when you want to, and also kind of have the time maybe to explore different options. I can go one better on you with the car. So I've actually got a car that's 2003.
Oh wow!
And I think it's okay. Maybe is it 2003? I'm pretty sure it is.
Things in the bonnet.
To be fair, it may be 2005. It's a VW Polo, but I share it with my sisters because we all live in a similar part of North London. And I mean, it's essentially a write-off. I mean, it is actually a write-off, but it keeps on going. And as long as it keeps on going, we're really not, you know, especially living in London, it's nice to have it. Okay, all right. Well, I think on that note, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Gary, for being a really interesting interviewee, and I hope that listeners and viewers enjoy. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this interview, then please do subscribe to my channel.